Hey,
Hi.
hey, hey.
How are you doing?
I think those lights are going to be an issue. There we go. Okay.
I've got a little bar at the top that says recording, so hopefully
Okay.
you will keep
Yes, it's
doing.
recording. It told me it was recording when it came on.
Okay, good. Most
Are
excellent.
those lights still too bad, or are they okay?
They're okay.
Okay.
And you are not in shadow, which is important.
Yeah.
I
Okay.
have to remember which one to look at. I've got my big monitor over here so I can see, but this is the one that has the camera.
Let's see. This might. Maybe I can do that and turn these lights off. There we go.
Okay. Yes, I've got you. Wonderful. So this is Elle Andrews Patt, and she is giving us an interview today for The Right Focus. And I was on your website today, and I need to take lessons because it's very clean. It's very open. It looks wonderful.
Thank you.
So I put a link to it will be in the show notes.
Okay.
So this is all about
on the laptop. It looks great. On mobile, it always changes the way a website looks.
Yes.
And I think it's really important when people do their websites on their computers that they go and see how it looks on their phone.
Yes.
Yeah, because you might have to restack things. Like I like to put things side by side, but the left side of the website always comes up first on the mobile. So you have to make sure they come out in the right order. So
right.
Yeah.
Well, tell us about your books that you have out.
I write paranormal murder mysteries. So I write the real world. They're kind of gritty detective stories, but they have ghosts in them.
Okay.
Yep.
I saw on your website.
I also write a lot of speculative fiction. So my novellas and my short fiction that I have in a lot of anthologies and that I've had published in a couple of magazines are speculative fiction, which again is real world with some fantastical twist.
Right.
So, yeah.
How long have you been publishing?
Since 2013.
Okay.
Yep. And I had a weird, bizarro fiction story. That's the first one that I sold. To an anthology. Well, it's to an online magazine called Solar Side. And then they did an anthology from their best of stories. And what they did was they just published one story a month. So people would submit and then they would pick one story. And they paid pretty well. And it's a zombie story. I've written a couple of zombie stories, which is one of those things that they tell you, don't write zombie stories. They've been overdone. But I had a unique twist too with some flesh-eating Pomeranians and yeah, certain types of people find it laugh out loud funny. So the hero is pretty hapless and confused and doesn't understand what's going on.
And when you did it in 2013, people probably weren't saying no more zombies. I think they hit like 2015.
Oh, they were. They came back with The Walking Dead, but again, they had a unique premise, So, yeah, I think as long as you do things with a unique twist, that people are still open to them. Yeah.
Right. Well, tell us how you got started in the idea of writing for publication and then publication.
I started out writing young, like so many writers have. And in college, I got put off by, a guy who said, how do you know this? I was writing a fantasy story, but it was set during the Vietnam War. And I was talking about how the guy's socks were wet and his feet itched and how uncomfortable he was in the jungle. And this guy was like, but how can you know this? And I was like, I don't know. I'm 18 and a woman and have never been to war, so I guess I don't. And I actually stopped writing. I stopped writing altogether for
gosh.
12 years. So as a young mother in my early 30s, I started writing fan fiction. And then I learned at the feet of the great fan fiction writers at the time, you could go in, they had all these forums and get betas and critiques on your read, and they'd give you all this feedback. And I learned so much more than I did in college from my English professors about, point of view and tenses, past and present tense, and, how to structure a story. And in fanfic, you have this sandbox of a TV show or a book that you really enjoy, and you can work in that sandbox and find certain things that that you're weak doing, like writing the sentences. People don't know how to write description. So you can pick a story and write it in this universe that so you don't have to worry about characterization and that kind of thing. And you can pick one thing to work on. So I would pick a story where I worked on, smell and taste and touch and made everything very tactile. And then the next time I might work on how to put, 5 characters in a scene and keep them all separate where everybody knows who's saying what, and, how to do actions without being boring. So I learned a lot from fan fiction. Yeah.
So it was good practice.
Yeah, it was. And we were in college before I quit writing, we were required to submit stories to magazines. So I had learned the submission process back when you had to mail everything in and include a, self-addressed stamped envelope to get your reply back. So, and I had gotten a couple of really, really good rejections, which at the time I didn't realize how good they were. Science Fiction and Fantasy magazine. I got a rejection letter from them that was basically, your story ending is too dark for us, which isn't much of a rejection. So, and now I know that, but it took me 30 years to get there. Yeah. So I started publishing in 2013 because I was starting to write original fiction and had done National Novel Writing Month. And I had all these original short stories that I didn't know what to do with. So I had about 10 or 12 stories, and I found some of the market listings and went ahead and started submitting. So yeah, at some point you just have to get brave enough to stick it out there and see what happens.
So short fiction is difficult for me. I naturally go into the long form of novels, and it was hard for me to cut down to novellas. Was it difficult for you as short fiction moving to the novel form? Because your ghost book that I saw was
absolutely huge. Yeah. It took me a long time to work my way up from short fiction to longer fiction. And again, although I was already writing original fiction short stories, I went to the long form in fan fiction. And that was how I figured out how to stretch my stories. Saulstein has a book on how to stretch stories, and that was helpful. I didn't even finish reading the book. It was essays on moving from short fiction to long fiction, and I just read a couple of those and realized I just had to have more story. You know what I mean? That the story isn't always over. Short fiction, a lot of people write short fiction that has a whole novel concept in it. And that's the problem with their short fiction. And they don't realize when they're submitting them that's the problem. They actually have a book on their hands and they have no idea. So, and I had a couple of those kind of stories where I was doing more telling than showing to keep the story short and to work within a certain word count in order to submit it to a magazine. And I luckily had, by that time, made some writer friends and was working with a critique group. And they were like, this is a book, and a short story is a moment in time. It's about one event or, one happening or one specific concept. And that's what makes it short fiction. But when you start trying to transverse years in your transitions, you have a novel.
Right.
And, you know, some novels do take place over 3 or 4 days. The Stephen King, look at Gerald's Game, you know, Stephen King, it takes place in a very short amount of time, and it's thick. But there's a lot of plot because he talks a lot about Gerald's, you know, backstory. So you're actually telling somebody's whole life, you know, in a compressed period of time. So, yeah.
So when you moved from short fiction to the long form, you were not just adding in descriptions and more events. Were you at doing more characters point of view?
Yeah, definitely. Additional characters and additional plotting. You know, more things happened, and your plots can be a lot more complex. You can have, you know, an A storyline and a B storyline, and, you know, kind of insert the C storyline that wiggles up through the middle, so that by the end of the book, you have some place to go in a sequel, and you can write a series. And standalone books still sell well in the bookstores, and bookstores still sell 60% of the books that are sold in the US. But as a hybrid author or an indie author, series are what sells best. And the bookstore started that. I mean, for a long time, and it's still prevalent, for a long time, for probably almost 20 years, almost everything was a series. And it kind of got annoying because sometimes you just want to read a book and have it be the book and not have to read 12 of them in order to find out what happens at the end. So
I remember picking up something because I'm a fantasy writer first, mystery second, and picking up a fantasy book, and I can't remember now what it was. It was way back in the early 90s. Turned me off that author because the story didn't reach any kind of conclusion at the very end. So it was driving me to do the second book. The second book was not at the bookstore. I know.
And that was probably back in the bad old days where you had to wait a year or 2 years for another book to come out. So I think it's kind of crazy how they ask writers to write so fast these days. And I've kind of fallen a little bit into that, and I do write faster now than I used to. But I just have to sit on my drafts and rewrite. I may have a whole story, but it's not the best story I want to put out there. So, and the series that end in cliffhangers still drive me a little bit batty when I'm reading on Kindle Unlimited or, you know, reading ebooks. I prefer series like, you know, Edgar Rice Burroughs' Tarzan. You know, that was one of my favorite series ever. He had 22 books, but they weren't cliffhangers. You know, you could read a book and then, you know, go the next week and get another book, and they were whole satisfying stories. And so that's kind of what I'm doing with my series. And I have 2 books so far out, you know, published and out on, you know, ebook, Kindle Unlimited, paperback, hardback, you know, I've got whatever format you want. But I have a slower read through on the second book, and I'm working on the 3rd book now, and was hoping to have it out this summer, but I think it's going to get pushed to the fall. And my books have a satisfying ending, so people are slower to pick the sequel up. They're
not driven to
it. They have been, but because I end the book, even though you know that there's more to the story, because I always leave like a minor, you know, cliffhanger. Hey, what happened to this question? And I always bring whatever unanswered questions there are back in at the end. You have a minor reason to go to the next book, and if you enjoy the characters. But I always will and intend to always, in any of my series, conclude the storyline. So yeah, I have one book with a blind detective in Daytona that I'm waiting to have it come out, and I want to get my 3rd book in the Andrea Kelly series out, and then I'll introduce this book, which is totally different character, but it's the same type of story with a ghost involved. And it's very much a standalone, but it paves the way for a kind of monster of the week story. So if it does well, then I'll take a series through that. And that's how a lot of the romance writers now are doing series. And I think that it'll probably filter through eventually to the fantasy and mystery series, even the traditional ones without any paranormal, is that they'll take, in romance, they'll write 3 to 6 books in a universe, and some of they'll write their first book, and then they'll take 2 characters from the first book and write the second book, and then 2 characters in the second book and write the third book. And sometimes all the characters will have been introduced in the first book, and then they'll star in their own books as they go along. But I think that's kind of going to happen, or you'll have a spinoff. Like I'm thinking about spinning off one of my secondary characters with another of the secondary characters and having their own series. So, but you do that in fantasy, right? Do you think that'll happen? Yeah.
So I have a series where I have a central character. It's very hard for me to, I fall in love with my characters and I don't want them to experience angst after I get them through the first book. So it's very hard for me to move them into another angsty situation that they have to have a lot of trauma to. And I think that's from 30 years of teaching teenagers that I don't want to trauma. But
I read one of your books late in the series. So yeah, so I didn't have a full view of what characters were coming from where.
Well, I started out, I was going to take a character that I had introduced in the first book. This is my Regency Mysteries, and use him as primary character in the second book, and then do the same kind of thing for the third book. But it sort of fell apart because I really didn't bring in somebody to develop into another character. So I came up with a totally new couple for the third book, even though somewhat of what they were talking about was the same situation.
Yeah.
And so I just kept that pattern, as I went through. And I was a lot happier doing that. I think I'm happier somewhat doing, because I don't like to put my characters in angst constantly. I was happier doing that particular thing, just moving new people in constantly. But
I know I have my mysteries are very, very mumuch whodunit murder mysteries with ghost, and I don't go overboard with love story lines. But I do have characters being in relationships. And my 2 main characters in my Andrea Kelly mystery series are very best friends, with that romantic vibe, like will they, won't they? And my first book, I really crushed people's hopes at the end by putting the male main character with another guy instead of my female main character. People were like, what? but it does come back around again, and there's just enough of that, are they ever going to get together to kind of carry it through without it being a full romance, storyline. So yeah. And I kind of like that. I've had people say it seems very realistic to them. The back and forth. Yeah. So.
Well, it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, that you write a complete book and then you start the revision process. Would you call yourself a plotter or a pantster who then goes plotter with revision?
I always thought I was a pantser. But once I got an agent, because I have a fancy New York agent, he wanted synopsises, of the following books. So I wrote a synopsis for the second and the third book back in like 2015. and then he didn't end up selling my books to a traditional publisher. They went into the process, like acquiring editors wanted the books, but when they went into marketing meetings into the big five publishing houses, they didn't know how to market my books. They're
Didn't fit their needs.
They're not that different. Yeah, they're not that different, but they are gritty with ghosts, and they're still whodunits. And they didn't have what they call comps. So they didn't have novels to compare it to. So the acquiring editors couldn't hand it to the marketing department and say, this book is like, this other book that, was a bestseller. When, as it worked its way through the publishing house, they said no. So my agent, encouraged me to go with a small press, or, an indie publisher. So my books are out with Blue Beach Press, and which is my press, and I publish anthologies for other authors. So like I have 15 authors, and we publish anthologies, and some of my stories are in them, and some of the anthologies don't have any of my stories in it. But I put out my mysteries, and they did well. And my agent said, okay, so your mysteries are selling well. Do you want me to sell the audio rights? And I was like, you can do that? And he said, yeah. So I have the print and the ebook rights, and I've sold the audio rights to Podium Publishing, which publishes through Audible, and they're huge. They publish Neil Gaiman, and they have a bunch of authors, and they bought all 3 books, and I only had one out at the time. So, and they did the Audible, and then I sent them the second book, and they've done the audio for that and have it out, and they'll do the audio for the 3rd book. And that to me was kind of a revelation, that you could sell rights separately like that anyway. So that's definitely a hybrid situation. I have a traditional audiobook publisher, but I've published the books under my own independent press. So so
it pays to think about different ways that you can.
He sent them. He sent them the synopsis. That's what he did. And from 2015, when I was going through the traditional book publishing process. And I was like, because the second book definitely, after, George Floyd, that second book is about slavery and the ghost of a slave. And so I had to be very careful.
Yes.
As a white female writing, or writing about this Black male slave, and the consequences of slavery and human trafficking in today's world. And I had to be careful to still keep it entertaining and not too preachy. And my main character, Andrea, is an archivist, so she does a lot of research and stuff. And so there is a little bit of, an element of history in the books. And people have seemed to take to that well. So I just have to be really careful with balancing the amount of, here's truth and accuracy and historical fiction, and here's entertaining. So, but definitely, if I hadn't already had that synopsis out there, I would have changed that storyline. So I'm writing to the 3rd synopsis now. And so I'm kind of plotting now. I've learned to plot, because I'm trying to stay within the synopsis that I wrote years ago, while I went away and wrote other things and then came back to the story. Yeah, so I think actually a synopsis is a great way to get into a story, and it's kind of a mini plot. It's not like a 2-page plot, or some people do those notebooks, with their whole plotting circle, and get it very detailed, and it's fine. Some people need that in their head to organize, but I kind of keep the whole story in my head, and I actually only write in one document, Word document. I don't write in Scrivener or anything like that. if I have things that I cut, or I have research that I did, or a note that I need to make, it all goes down at the bottom of the document. So, and I know it's there if I scroll down to it. So, yep.
What length
I
are
do a
your
lot of
synopses?
find and search in my document. So, and I don't keep my own story Bible. My oldest daughter does my story Bibles for me.
Oh, that's nice, because I
Yeah.
usually wind up forgetting something
Oh, it's
when I'm
terrible.
creating mine.
Were his eyes brown? I change people's names halfway through, you know. So I brought somebody back to life that had died in the first book, and you know, I had to, when I referred to my Bible, I was like, oh, he's dead. Can't use him. So yeah. I'm really good when I'm working on the story, but after I'm done with the book,
Mm-hmm.
it's gone out of my head. So like most things, my kids are always saying, memory loss is, you know, makes things fun and exciting again. I have no long-term memory for stories or books or my characters even. So I always have to go back and review before I start over again.
Somebody will ask me about one of my early books from 2015 or 2016. I'm going like, I have so many other plots in my head after that. So many
Yeah.
other characters. How am I supposed to remember? How long are your synopses?
They're only about 300 words.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. They're less than a page. So yeah.
I call that, I have something that's very, 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 very short. I call it sort of a sketch because it takes me through some major things. But then I set that aside and just launch into the story. And if I get stuck, then I look at it. If I don't get stuck, I just blow on through whatever I had originally written.
Yeah. I definitely have enough plot points in there to go through. Gosh, what is that girl's name? If you Google on how to write a synopsis, like one of the first the first 2 or 3 entries is from like 2012, and it's a Star Wars example of how to write a synopsis, and it makes you realize that you take everything out of your story. You know, you've written a 85,000 word novel, and you have all these secondary plot lines and things that you think are important and characters you think are important. And you know, this way of writing a synopsis is you take your main character and you only tell their part of the story, and the rest is kind of by the wayside.
Right.
Yeah, that's all glommed onto your main thread, and it clarifies for you what you're writing about and what your through line is. So if you do that first before you even start writing, you know, you have that bare bones skeleton just, you know, standing there ready for you to attach things to, so which is great. So
are there any tools that you use that make your writing life easier?
Unfortunately, I can't be like, oh, I use Scrivener or Snowflake because I don't. I do it all in one Word document. The most important tools that I use are for marketing. I use a tool called ClickMagick for tracking links. And people think tracking links are a bad thing, but they're not actually. They give you a lot of information. So I use tracking links in all my ads and all my newsletters and in the backs of my books. And the tracking links give me a really pretty URL. So my go-to is go.eap, you know, for Elle Andrews Patt fiction. And so it's go.eapfic.com. And if you go there, you just get to my website. But when I add the back part of the URL, I have this pretty little tracking link, and then I can see how many people actually clicked on the link. I can't see like where they go or anything. It's not like I'm following people through the internet, but I can actually track, okay, you know, I sent out this newsletter and 16 people clicked on this link to get a short story that I offered, or, you know, 30 people clicked on the link to go to Amazon to buy Ghost. And that to me is super, super useful. And because I do Facebook ads, I can put my Facebook pixel in the tracking link. And that way, if I want to retarget somebody who's gone and clicked on the link, I can do that in targeted audiences. Yeah, in Facebook. Facebook ads have been extremely useful for me. Yeah. And I've done some Amazon advertising, and I like that too. When I do promotions, like I'll do a BookBab ad or a Book Gorilla ad, or get into one of their promos, where it goes out in their newsletters, I use a tracking link, because that's the only way I know if the money that I gave them was useful. If I give them $50 and they sent 200 people to look at my book, yay.
Yeah.
There's no way for me to track
return on investment.
Yeah. There's no way for me to track who bought the book, because they're buying on Amazon, and you have to trust Amazon to tell you, 3 people bought your book today. And that's the only way to find out. So you can't really link that activity of going to the website through your link with conversions, which is how many books were sold. But it gives you kind of a rough idea. So, and if you turn off all your ads, then you find out what your actual organic traffic is, and how many people are coming on their own. And then you turn your ad back on and you get a bunch more sales. You're like, yeah, the ad works. So,
how do you maintain productivity?
Well, sometimes I don't. I think a lot of writers are too focused on writing every day. They've heard you have to write every day to be a writer. Nope, you have to write to be a writer. And if you write, for 6 months steadily, and you have a whole book to work on, and you're doing rewriting, and you only write 5 days a week, or you take 3 months off, and then you go back to writing, you're still a writer. I can't keep up steady, daily writing goals. And I already know that about myself, and it just makes me feel guilty if I try. So I don't. And I actually work really good on deadlines. Some people, a deadline will lock them up. But when I have an actual, dated deadline, I write really well to that. And I know that I need, 8 months of writing to get a book out. And then I have to sit on it for another few months in order to rewrite it. So, and I've gotten, with practice, I've written the thing about, 10,000, hours of a skill in order to develop a skill is true. And I've written, I think I figured it out. I've written 1,400,000 some words now of story, of actual published story that is somewhere that it can be found by other people. And then I have, 2 or 3 books in a drawer. And one of those I actually really, really want to pull out and rewrite. But I'm basically working on my 7th book right now in Wraith, and you would think it would get easier. And in terms of writing in a linear, like I don't write in blocks and take my scissors, like literally on paper, and piece my story together anymore. I've developed the ability to write linearly, so I can start at the beginning and pretty much right through to the end. But you would think that would get easier, and it doesn't. It gets a little bit harder, I think, every time I go through a book, because I know more, and then I worry more about, am I getting it right? Yeah.
Well, I started out with a certain process, and then 4 books in, I had to change my process. And I've learned that I have to keep changing my process.
I agree totally. And it's not really that you have to change it, is that you, as you're writing, you're recognizing how your skills are changing.
Right.
and how your process needs to be adjusted to accommodate those skills. So, in certain regards, practice always makes better in writing. Practice always, even if nobody's reading it. And I had a great critique group in Daytona Beach. They'd already been meeting for 25 years when I joined them, and I was with them for 12, and we met every week and read 20 pages from 2 different people, and you could send a book through in a year by submitting every 3 or 4 weeks, and get this great feedback. And a lot of published work came out of that group because we were committed to doing it. But that doesn't mean you have to do it every single day.
Right.
It really doesn't. Yeah.
Right.
So yeah. When I'm unproductive, I'm extremely unproductive. So yeah. And when I'm productive, I'm writing all the time. Yeah. To the annoyance of my family.
Yes, I know how that goes. Well, according to my timer, we still have like 3 more minutes to go. So do you have any last words or advice that you want to give?
For writers, pay attention to the fact that you just can't put your book out there. You do have to market it, and it's a business, and you do have to invest money into it. And if you don't have money, that's fine. If you have $1 a day, you can run a $1 a day ad on Facebook, and you have to have your title out there somewhere for people to find it, and ask for reviews. There are sites that have lists of reviewers, and you just write to them and say, well, most of the time they'll have a website, and you can go and see if they even take your genre. And if they do, and you read some of their other reviews on like Goodreads or whatever, write to them and say, will you review this for me? And build an email list with free stories. And then ask your email list, hey, who wants an advanced reading copy? I need reviews. And you tell them specifically, I'm going to give you this advanced copy, but I want a review, an honest review. Amazon requires that you don't ask for a 5-star review. You ask for an honest review. But that's how I got my reviews started. Yeah. And that's how I keep my story around the, it slides back and forth between like the top 50 in ghost fiction to, 110, and it goes in and out, and it's because of my ads.
Right.
So, yeah. You definitely,
so marketing
definitely
is essential.
to invest in your business.
Yeah. So a writer has to be a marketer as well.
Yes. Yeah. And I mean, Mark Dawson's ads for authors, it's $150 or something, and it's the best $150 you'll ever spend. So it's not outrageously expensive. I think spending up to $500, even $1,000 for marketing tools or education is, money well spent. Yeah. Yep. All
right. Well, thank you very much, Elle. And will I see you this Saturday at the meeting?
You know what? I was going to be there as of Tuesday, and as of now, I'm not. Yeah. It's one of those family things. It was like, oh my God, it's Memorial Day. And we were planning to be home. We knew it was Memorial Day. But a friend of ours had their plans change, and they're like, will you come with us, to, their parents' lake house? And we were like, of course, it's my godson. I haven't seen him since COVID started. I'm like, yeah, if I tell my family, no, I have to go to a writer's meeting. We can't go to the lake. Sometimes life is just a little more important than getting those words on the page.
That is so true. I don't know how many meetings I've missed because all of a sudden my nephew and my grandnephew, who I rarely see, will show up, and I'll go like, more important.
Yeah. It is. So, but I'm glad you're going. So there'll be a few people there then. It's going to be fun. So yeah.
I have to make sure I
the first in-person meeting since COVID, that's great. So, yep. And it's the third.
I hear they're going to have bourbon balls, and I'm going to definitely have to have some of those. All right.
Linda's bourbon balls are the best.
Yeah. See you later.